What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Today we're here with our brother out of Nigeria, John Paul Iwuoha, if I'm saying that just correct. Now, this brother helped co-author the book of how you make money basically in Africa, 100 different ways with Dr. Harnet. I was paraphrasing the title. He'll correct me on that. I have that book actually, though. It's a good book. They put a lot of extensive time in that book. I mean, if you want to know how to make any kind of money on the continent of Africa, they tell you the way. So, John, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, John, tell people a little bit about your background, how you got involved in writing the book.
Okay, so it was way back in 2014. Before then, I was in corporate. I worked for a couple of years at PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC. It's one of the big four consulting firms in the world. From there, I got into oil and gas. For those who know, Nigeria is a major oil and gas player. I think it's in the top producers on the continent. It's actually the top one now since Libya left the scene. So at that point, my first love had always been consulting. Helping people figure things out, essentially helping businesses solve problems and helping entrepreneurial people more or less connect to their potential. And at that point, I thought, there should be something out there that helps people figure out, opportunities in Africa if there are things that they're interested in. Before then, I've been doing a lot of research on the side, actually. So you can imagine my shock and horror when I got on Amazon and the only book I saw on doing business in Africa was not even written by an African, And it more or less, that was when it really struck me, because all this time I'd always heard this thing about the African narrative being written by outsiders, from an outsider's perspective. And so it makes it look like on a continent of over 1 billion people, does it then mean that nobody can present these things to the world through African eyes? So that's when it hits me that this book had to be written. And around the same time, our paths crossed, my path and Dr. Harnet's path. And then we said, this would be a really good idea to tell the African business story from African eyes through the African perspective. And that's when we wrote it. That's when we wrote the book. And we didn't really have grand expectations for it. We just wanted it to be out there, more or less something on Amazon that says, this is a book on African opportunities written by Africans through African eyes. And it took off, even after all these years, it's still, selling quite a lot of copies. And I'm really not surprised by that, because every single year, the African agenda or the attractiveness of the African continent as a place of economic opportunity and potential continues to grow higher and higher and higher and higher. And I expect the debates and the conversation around Africa as a place not for philanthropy and charity, which has been the approach for over 5 decades. And I hope I get the chance to talk more about this. Not about charity and help Africa. Africa is suffering, Africa is dying. Yes, those problems exist, but we're showing how people are using their creativity and their innovation to solve the very same problems that American aid, European aid, Asian aid has not been able to solve in Africa. And I think that is something that requires important attention, because if taxpayers' money in the United States, in Canada, and in Europe is not solving the problems that it's intended to, then essentially we're fleecing taxpayers. So the money shouldn't be going to governments, which of course enables corruption, builds a culture of entitlement and dependency on the African side, and doesn't provide any incentive to solve the real problems you're trying to solve in Africa. Rather, we have these guys who have very little resources. All they have is passion, guts, creativity, and innovation. And they are solving the very same problems in much more fantastic ways than billions and trillions of dollars in aid money couldn't solve in all these years. And I hope to get more specific as we continue on this conversation.
Well, I agree with you 100% about aid is not needed, because, you give the aid to the governments, you already know what's happening with that money. They pocketing the money, they buying Range Rover, Rolls Royce, and everything else what they're doing. I believe what you have in your book should be if you're gonna give money, do it that way. In other words, like just me being on the ground in different African countries, I see that there is a great need for the creation of small businesses. So in your book, for instance, there's one business that's like really could boom. It's like waste management. You guys talked about that in your book. You have a waste management company here in America. You already kind of know how to do it. You know, go to the continent, start the waste management company, get the contracts, get everything that you need done. And like I said, you may be the only kid on the block. And now everybody coming to you for waste management.
Exactly. But you know, the thing is, now just extending the conversation on waste management. Now, because it's been figured out in the West, doesn't necessarily provide a clear template for doing it in Africa. In my career, I've seen many people who come with the approach of, this has already been done in the States, it's already been done in the UK, let's just copy it and paste it on the African continent. They come in with a lot of money, a couple of years down the road, they are running away. They just cannot crack the markets. And that's because Africa is some sort of organized chaos. So from the outside, it looks like, you know, what's really going on here? You know, there's really nothing happening here. Let's go in and show them how it's done before the market humbles them. So yeah, this truth is the same in every market. It doesn't matter if it's the American market or the Chinese market. The ultimate judge is the market. It's not you coming with your high intelligence, your big bags of money. That's not really what cracks Africa. What cracks Africa is the ability to understand what the market wants and then create something that appeals to that need. So for example, look at waste management. Waste management in Africa is not yet as sophisticated as it is in the West. We are still at the stage of waste collection. So right now, you put out your waste. Where I live, on Fridays and maybe on Tuesdays, they come by and they pick the waste. Right now, it runs like clockwork. When I was growing up, it wasn't that way. So we figured out waste collection. But guess what's happening to all that waste? They are taking it to some empty, large parcel of land. They're digging up the ground and they're burying that waste. So it's still the same model of landfills. That's what we're doing here. Now, so where the opportunities are in Africa right now, in many parts of Africa, is in what happens to the waste after you collect that waste. Do you recycle it? Do you transform it into energy? And we're beginning to see the early signs of that happening. There's a major power plant in the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, that collects the municipal waste and then incinerates it to generate power, which is, you know, transmitted to the national grid. That is one way to look at it. We're beginning to see small businesses playing around with the early forms of recycling, especially with plastics and paper and a couple of other stuff, but it's still in its very infant stage. So if you come into Africa with the approach of the waste management is an opportunity, but you don't understand the value chain and you end up trying to get into the collection side, that place is already really congested. The competitive forces are already very strong. You're going to get crushed in that space. So you need to be able to identify the gaps in the value chain where there's nobody playing or very few people playing. And then that's exactly where the money sits right now. And that's exactly what happens in almost all the opportunities we'll talk about in the book, from food to power to education to transportation, all of it. You need to look at it as a value chain, because I can count except maybe we're talking about space travel, then I would say that's like a very virgin territory, right? But in almost every other space, people are beginning to take up some parts of the value chain, but there are parts of the value chain where there's a lot of space and a lot of money to be made.
Yeah, when I made that statement, you know, like it coming from the American side, I would say, is that you got to have some sort of business acumen. Now, I agree with you 100%. Things don't run the same like they do in America versus African nations. Oh, I know that just by going there. What I also learned is that you got to really make a lot of relationships to even do anything on the African continent. If you're not gonna make relationships with nobody, you're gonna fail. I know that too. And so what I mean when I'm talking about waste management, at least on this side, we're not just talking about collection, and we're just not talking about landfills. We're also talking about, as you're saying, either turning it to renewable energy. If you're gonna burn it, how can you clean burn it where it's not polluting the environment? So when I mean waste management, I mean the whole thing. That's one example. Another example you guys had in the book was about movie theaters, that they don't have a lot of movie theaters on the continent. And there's like a big opportunity there.
Yeah. So if we look at movie theaters, so we use a certain analogy in the book that Africa still has about just one movie theater per 1 million people. Now, since we wrote the book, a couple of theaters have come up. But right now, the landscape is changing because, we've been hit by COVID, and now we have to go through a tough economic recovery. And we now have players like Netflix on the continent. But before Netflix, there were the likes of Iroko and Afrinoli and a couple of all of them. Now, the interesting thing to know here is that before Netflix even got to the African continent, we already had the Netflix of Africa, as it were, the Iroko TV. These are the guys who, more or less curate the local content. And maybe for the benefit of viewers who don't know, the second biggest movie industry in the world is actually in Africa, Nollywood, in Nigeria specifically. So and this is by the number of movies produced every year. So Bollywood out of India is number one. They produce the highest number of movies every year. The second is the African movie industry, and then the third is Hollywood out of America. But the interesting thing is Hollywood clearly has all the money, and then maybe Bollywood, and then the African market. But African movies and African creative pieces are hugely popular. You need to just go to YouTube and see the kind of consumption that's going on there. But the curious thing is, it's not even Africans who are really consuming this. You're beginning to see a lot of overflow from other parts of the world, maybe somebody from Cambodia or Vietnam or from the Caribbean, and they're loving this stuff. So it's starting to show you what's really possible. Now, why I'm saying this is, we can look at movie theaters as a business opportunity, but that may not be what the market wants. The product is entertainment. So whether you deliver it through some room that's called a movie theater, or you deliver it via mobile devices like a VOD, video on demand, like Netflix or Iroko, or whatever form it's going to take, the key here is that the market is evolving, and then the taste of the market is changing. So you don't need to lock in your views of the market opportunities as a movie theater opportunity or VOD opportunity. You just need to read the market and then flow with it. Because if you persist with one angle, right now that a pandemic has happened and it has changed the habits of consumers and the market, you need to be able to somehow to evolve to rhyme with that. So yes, since we wrote it, the market has changed. The movie opportunity might be in there, but there are other big competitors that are not cinemas or theaters. They are coming via the virtual platform, via the internet. Mobile telephone penetration in Africa, very high. Internet penetration, very close. Social media use, very high. So it can go either way. People consume videos right now on Facebook, for example. They watch a lot of YouTube. And then they also have their subscription on Netflix and Iroko and all the other platforms. So the market is evolving.
Yes, it is. And even on the news side, ever since you said COVID, is that now even, most people are producing news within their homes. And this is something that, even myself, was doing a long time ago. And it's quite interesting that now you see the mainstream news channels, or even local news, even here, in America for sure, they all doing it in their homes. And so now working from home is like a big thing now. And I don't think working from home is going to go away. We have two people. We have one person in Uganda and another one in Kenya that work for us, and they do the same thing. They do their work, for us from home, and it's better for them. They don't have to, take a risk in the pandemic. They don't have to go out and traveling and all. They can just do their work, turn it in, and it goes up. So, that's changed on the side of media. So do you think that you guys need to write a part 2 to that book, or an updated version of that book since the market's changed?
Yeah, so yes, we have a sequel in the works, but there's a bigger need in the market, which is that, as you can imagine, we'll never be able to write enough books. We just wrote 101, but even since then, I'm sure I can easily spit out up to 1,000, because they come in very different mutations. So in working with entrepreneurs, I noticed that people have the basic germ or the kernel of a business idea. What they need is help to flesh it out and develop it and adapt it to the mood of the market. And that goes beyond a book. That is a journey. It's a journey that you need somebody to help you navigate, or somebody you have access to that can, because these are decisions, just one decision can make you or ruin you. You take the wrong turn, and that's it. You get a hit, and maybe you're not able to recover from it. So in the end, I know information is important, but then the application of the information is really where we're seeing the big winners. So most of the success stories I've got from people who read the book are not really from people who just had the information. In fact, I find that there are people who just get involved in some level of intellectual stimulation. They're just hunting for ideas, but they never really do anything with it. Those are not the kinds of people I want to work with, because even if you write 10 books, you'll never be able to satisfy those people. They don't have a bias for action. So what we need are people who have the passion, they want to do something, and they just need help. They have the basic germ of the idea, and then we can help them develop it and then flesh it out, and then start talking about strategy and how to confront the challenges of doing business in Africa, and then surviving, adapting, scaling. Those are the important conversations we need to be having. Yes.
Yes. Well, no matter where you have went in the world, supply and demand is always, the key. And, if you to creating a good business on the continent, definitely the demand for jobs is just, so I believe in just what I see, you could win a lot more in the area of labor, and even pay the people more than what they would even get paid in their countries. And you still win in the business, and you can make your business grow, right, on the African continent. Correct. And it can't be all about you getting money, but it's like, are you providing needs to the local people there? Are you being a good company? Are you treating them right? Are you setting a good standard? Because also at the same time as that, people got to, for instance, de-Americanize themselves when they go to the African continent, at least in the guise of business, because it's not the same. For instance, my little short view of it is, in America, people are like fast. Everything's fast. And depending where you're from, like New York is really fast. LA, Houston is fast, where I'm from. But it's a little, it's a little bit slower, but not as fast, but it's faster than most places, right? So when I got to Ethiopia, and we were working on some things in business, I literally had an anxiety attack. I'm going to be honest with you, because I was like, they move too slow. What is wrong? And I'm glad I had Kellen with me and say, Phil, you got to calm down. It's not the same. They move at a different speed than we move. Met great people, made great connections, everything, but they just don't move like we move here in America, and so that's just like one thing that I had to get used to, right? And could you explain more about that, like the differences with the way we move in America or the UK versus like Africa when they go in business? Because that'll get you too, because we don't move the same.
Okay, so I think the cultural shock also hit me the very first time. So I was still in corporate. So when I had to work on global teams, I realized that Americans, for example, are very direct. You get on a call and then they just get down to business. And in Africa, that's really strange, because it will be strange if I'm going to do business with you and then I don't ask you how you are, how you're feeling, about family, maybe say something about the last football game or something. Because Africa is really all about relationships. And relationships start with knowing the person on the other side, and then starting a conversation to know who you're dealing with. But when you always get down to business and you're direct, you give the impression that you're just transactional, like it's just this transaction and there's nothing else. You're trying to be impersonal. And for an African, it's quite strange. And they may not make it obvious to you, but you might unintentionally change the dynamics of that situation, because the person reflects to you what you're showing. The person appears to be impersonal. The person will not go above and beyond to be friendly or give you some insights or help that ordinarily will give you an edge. So what you just get is a transaction. But when you get to know the person on the other side, then you have some skin in the game. The person thinks, okay, this on a very basic level is somebody I know, is an acquaintance or is a friend. And one thing you would have also noticed in Ethiopia, which is very common across Africa, is the accommodation. We're accommodating people. It's likely we'll go the extra step to help a foreigner or a new person or a guest or a stranger. That's just who we are. It doesn't matter what tribe it is, what culture it is, what language you speak on the African continent. It's basically the same. We are accommodating people. But if in our attempt to be accommodating, you appear to be standoffish and you're like, no, I don't want any of that. This is just a transaction. You do your part, I do my part, and we're done. Then you would have unintentionally asked for trouble. I think that's the only correct way I can put it.
Well, I don't. It sounds like and correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you dealt with a lot of white people in business, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Well, I'm from Black Americans, especially Black Americans from the South. We're that way. We say, hey, how you doing? And have small conversations and oh, you got kids, you got a family, you got this. So Black Americans and how we would approach you in business would be different than probably how white people will approach you in business, because they're like that. They don't care about your family. Well, but let me not say that, because white people from the South I see is maybe kind of the same a little bit, but for sure, I agree with you. It seems kind of rude. Basically, what you're saying seems like rude. Like, hey, how you doing, man? Look, I don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about these numbers. Yeah, see,
exactly.
I get it.
Like, exactly.
Shoot, I don't want to do no business with you, because I know why people do it. It's like if you can get to know a person, maybe you get to know how they do their business. For instance, if you talk to a man, right, and you hear that he's married, he has children, he's taking care of business, you may think, oh, he's a little bit more mature and responsible. Versus a man that's just single and just wilding out, and you get it out of him. I'm in the club every weekend, and I met this woman and that woman. Oh, really? Okay. I'm just saying like what the stereotypes are. I'm not saying this always correct, but you know what I'm talking about. A married man is more considered mature about his business.
Exactly. Yeah. True. So
you don't find it out by talking.
Yeah, but there's also another side to it, which can come off as exploitative. So recently, there's this conversation I was having in my community. For those who don't know, West Africa produces up to 70% of the cocoa that the world uses to produce chocolates. That's where chocolate comes from. 70% of the main raw material, cocoa beans, comes from West Africa. In fact, two countries.
God bless you. I love chocolate. God bless you.
In fact, two countries, Ghana and the Ivory Coast, are responsible for 60% of the global supply. Anybody who knows anything about cocoa farming is that it is likely going to be one of the very last crops you can farm in a mechanized way, because there's really no equipment to farm cocoa. It's highly dependent on human labor. It's a very labor-intensive way to farm. So you can mechanize wheat production or rice or flowers or anything, but cocoa, no. Now, guess what? When my grandfather was still alive, he was a cocoa farmer, and back then, if you were a cocoa farmer, you're considered pretty well off, But right now, some of the poorest people on the African continent are cocoa farmers. And on the other end of that same value chain, you have chocolate. Chocolate has now grown into $100 billion in annual sales industry. It's growing faster than ever. Now, you look at the retail price of chocolate, make your choice, any brand. The farmers in Africa who produce 70% of the raw materials earn less than 5% of the retail price of chocolate. So what do you see? All these big brands, they show up and they keep trying to give charity to these farmers. They build schools for them. They give them incentives here and there. They come up, they show up for photo ops. They take pictures. They say, we're helping farmers in Africa. For Christ's sakes, these guys don't need help. They need fair commercial terms. Pay them what's fair. What's fair is fair. Give them a fair price. And you don't need to build schools for them or give them handouts or pay, things like charity. And these guys are doing this very hard work with a very wide smile on their face, because if you were in another part of the world, you have 70% of the supply, you could just shut it down. You just go on strike and say, I'm not producing this anymore. And the whole chocolate industry, shuts down. So that's another way I see it, as a form of exploitation. You can be accommodating to an extent that you don't see that you're being manipulated and being used. So I just thought I should throw it in there, given the conversation we're having.
Well, let's go there. I don't think the chocolate farmers should be the poorest in the world. They should be the richest in the world. So, but what, and correct me if I'm wrong, from what I've, seen and see how they exploit even children, is that they get them to harvest all of this and then they ship it to Europe and America and different places. They, package it, doing everything like that. And then they can maybe sell it right back to the African continent. I mean, I think, chocolate should be the cheapest in the world on the African continent, since that's where it's coming from. So
exactly.
The key is, how do you keep all production on the continent? In other words, from the farm to actually making the chocolate, putting in chocolate bars, whatever you want to do, and then selling it back. Because African chocolate should be, the main chocolate we should buy, outside of Hershey's and all these other, companies that's out there.
Okay, so it's an interesting angle you've come with, and there's a lot of opportunity here. So, but let me just get off chocolate just a bit. What's happening in cocoa and chocolate in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire is exactly what's happening with crude oil in Nigeria. Nigeria is Africa's biggest producer of crude oil. But guess what? Almost all the fuel, almost all the gas we use in the country is imported from refineries in Europe and the Americas. So we drill the ground, get this crude oil, put them on ships, ship them to refineries in the West, they refine it and sell us back the refined product.
Brother,
exactly. It doesn't make sense.
Brother, now you're talking my language. Petrochemical is what I know. Okay, that's one industry I know like the back of my hand. What for people that understand, they get, they basically, getting the oil from the ground, putting on maybe a 200,000 barrel ship or so. Some of them could be even more. Taking the raw crude to a cat cracker unit. Now, these cat cracker units I'm talking about, you can put this in Nigeria. It doesn't make sense. Is that they heat this particular cat cracker unit in the refineries? They heat the crude oil. As they heat the crude oil, different products start coming up through the unit. You can have some gasoline, you can have some diesel, you can get some kerosene, you can get some jet fuel, whatever. And they go to these different shore tanks there, and they do all this with crude oil. So what I'm saying is, the solution to that is for Nigeria to either nationalize a refinery, which I heard you guys do have some refineries, but really have some refineries that has big cat cracker units, and take your raw crude and make your own. It doesn't make sense to ship it anywhere.
Good. So I'm privileged to be one of those Nigerians who, because of my experience in the energy industry here, I've been to the 3 major government-owned refineries we have in the country. Guess what? They don't work. The workers, they dress up, go to the office, sit around. The equipment is not working. The fractional distillator you just talked about doesn't work. And every year there's money in the budget to pay the salaries and maintain the refineries, but they don't produce anything. So you see, the interesting thing here is when we talk about corruption, exactly what's happening in crude oil is exactly what's happening in cocoa. It's like there is something set up to make sure that no value addition happens on African soil. You only get out the raw products and just move it out of Africa. Don't add any value. Any value that's going to be added has to be added on European soil or American soil. Then you sell the Africans back the refined products. So now, why this is setting up the stage is that anybody who's listening to this and more or less is interested in Africa should really be boiling with anger. But that's exactly where the opportunities are. So for example, in Nigeria, Africa's richest man is a Nigerian, Aliko Dangote. He's now building the biggest refinery in all of Africa, building it in Lagos. Now, when that refinery goes online, it's going to displace a lot of the oil we're importing. Now, think about this. For more than 40 years, the government has been spending billions of dollars funding refineries that don't work. And Nigerians have been paying a lot of money because fuel is expensive, because it's imported. It's a product we have, but we import it. Now, it's taken one man's tenacity. I can only imagine the kind of political and physical and psychological struggle he's going through, but he's going to make it happen because he's got all that bank financing and everything. So sometimes all it takes is one person to call the bluff of this whole cartel, or people who think things are not going to work. And then going back to the cocoa thing, the opportunity we see here right now is that, these poor farmers don't really have a lot of options. If you don't sell to Hershey's or Nestle or Cadbury, essentially there's really not much you can do with your cocoa, because those farmers only know how to produce cocoa. Now, what we're beginning to see is we're seeing some small modular factories come up in places like Ghana. They buy off the cocoa from the farmers, and then they produce the chocolate on African soil, and then they market it abroad as fair trade chocolate or chocolates made in Africa. Now, anybody who has more or less, and this is a product you can sell on the basis of consumer consciousness. You let them know that the farmers are paid better when they buy this chocolate. You let them know that they are helping build the community and the society, making sure their kids go to school and things like that. Because the only reason why these farmers are trapped is the market is more or less what economists call a monopsony. So a monopsony means you have many suppliers. We have thousands of cocoa farmers across West Africa, but you only have few buyers. So rather than the sellers have the monopoly of the market, it's actually the buyers, because they've formed themselves into a cartel. They get to dictate the prices they pay the farmers. So what we need is more players to come in so that the farmers can have a variety of choice of who to sell their cocoa to. So if there's a variety of choice, they will likely sell to those people who will pay them a better price. And then Hershey's and Nestle and Cadbury and all of them will then have to sit up. So those are the opportunities for entrepreneurs. But what breaks my heart with cocoa is they just bring out the cocoa beans and then they dry it and then they ship it off to Europe or America and then grind it and then process it. So, but if that processing is happening on the ground here in Africa, it's a win-win. Now, the farmers will get paid better. The locals will be able to consume a product that grows on their soil because they can afford it. It's not at the price they can afford. I don't know if you know this guy on CNN. What's his name again? I can't imagine. So he came to West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, and went to the village, the deep village where those farming communities where cocoa is farmed. And he brought out a bar of chocolate and he was showing the farmers. They were in a big group. He was asking them, do you know what this is? They said they don't know what it is. They've never seen chocolate before. And all their lives, they've been producing the major raw material that's used for chocolate production. But they've never seen chocolate before. And then, they gave them a chance to taste it. And for the very first time in their lives, you saw 60-plus-year-old men, 70-plus-year-old men tasting chocolate for the very first time in their lives, even though they've been farming this commodity for more than 40 years. So there's a lot of change that will come into that market. But if we're hoping that this change will come from the politicians, from sanctions, from the United Nations, then we're missing the script. The only people who can flip this market are entrepreneurs who come in and create alternative demand for cocoa beans so that the farmers have more options to sell their produce. That's the only way change will happen. And that's exactly what's happening on the ground in Africa.
Yeah, and for me, I'm all about, like the young people getting involved with these things, like on the African continent as well, and also, throughout the diaspora as well, because the young people, I believe, is the group is going to turn everything around worldwide for Black people, right? So the key is just like, I'm even interested, my ears and perked up when it comes to the chocolate deal, because it's basically what you're saying is they have a monopoly. Hershey's, Cadbury, whatever, have a monopoly on the buyer side. And basically in America, we have a lot of capitalism. So the more companies, the better, right? Yep. Really, in America, you could even be sued when you have a monopoly all of a sudden. But that's not happening over there in the African continent. So maybe we need to start figuring more about this out. How can we take it from the bean to the chocolate bar and on the African continent? How much is it going to cost to produce that? And I believe as Black people, we need to get together to do that. You know what I'm saying? Because it's a need. That's basically what you're saying. And an opportunity to make a lot of money.
Exactly. So one key question would be, I know the African-American population is 40 million plus, 42 million people. What happens if we have a chocolate brand that's owned by an African-American and targeted at the African-American community? That's like a very sizable chunk of the American consumer markets right there. And then you have these linkages from Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire into the US. And now these things I'm saying they're not elements of wishful thinking. There are guys who are already doing this in Togo, in Ghana, in Cote d'Ivoire. They come in with this modular processing facilities. So they get the cocoa beans, they grind it, and then they process the chocolate right there within the country. And they get quite inventive with their packaging, with the narrative, the story, the messaging, the branding. And you know, chocolate is a brand consumption. People buy chocolate because it's Belgian chocolate or French chocolate or Swiss chocolate or whatever. Why can't we have chocolate which is truly African? We control the supply. We get players. Now, the reason I'm saying this is this. I believe the biggest unharnessed power on the face of the earth right now, especially as it concerns Africa, is Africa's diaspora community. Every single day, the Chinese are increasing their footprint on the African continent. Every single day, the Indians are doing it. The Lebanese are doing it. The Europeans are doing it. And then we see white Americans here. But the question you need to ask is, where is the African diaspora? It's very easy to say China is neocolonizing Africa. That's very easy to say. We can sit where we are and say, look at what China is doing. China is exploiting Africa, India, all of them. But where is the African diaspora? Where are the people who look like us, who have more or less an edge over all these other people who are coming in? Because we have all these connections all over the place. But what we see is a lot of inertness, a lot of fear. So one common example about what's going on here is, well, we know that the grass always looks greener on the other side. You have a lot of people who think moving out of the continent is the best way to go. But the funny thing is, every single time you go to the airport, you see a lot of expatriates coming into countries across Africa. So if you're saying that there's a lot of insecurity, that the business environment is not favorable, I'm not saying it is entirely, but why would somebody from Europe or America or China, for example, more or less a developed country where things work, there's power, there's electricity, there's running water 24 hours, where everything works, why would somebody want to give up the comfort of that to come to a place like this? Now, that's the part I think a lot of people are not asking themselves. The only reason they're doing it is, this is where the opportunity is. This is exactly, Africa is the only place that still has significant problems where you can come in and create a solution that's not as sophisticated as we would see in Europe or America, and you'll still be able to make a buck, because the needs here are still very intense. Many of them are basic. They're not yet very sophisticated. So that's the conversation, and we can have this conversation all day long. We look at every single product, every single commodity, every single need. You see gaps everywhere, and there are opportunities for people to fill this. So this is just for cocoa. I can imagine if somebody could come in, work with local farmers, be able to buy off their produce at a better price, brand the product as fair to farmers, fair to the community, 100% Africa, loud and proud. And this is chocolates from Africa for Africans. And you brand it that way to the African American community. So rather than go buy Hershey's or buy Cadbury or any of them, you buy something that your consciousness is aligned with, which is more or less not the same as a lot of the exploitation we're seeing right now. So I'll give it to you. I grew up on American movies. You guys sure know how to tell solid stories. And you wrap those stories around heroes, around products, around everything. Chocolates here, for example, cocoa is a very basic product. Right now, it's farmed by poor people. What it needs is somebody who can create a product and create an alternative narrative and sell it to a captive market. And I think the 42 million people in America who identify as people of African descent is a solid captive market for that to happen.
Well, how I feel about the African continent for sure is that I always said that Black America needs to connect with the continent, because there's so many opportunities and resources, and it could be good for the people on the continent. And also we can bring those same resources back to, communities here in America. And like you said, you're right. If we were to get involved with that in my mindset, it'll be much bigger than just the Black community. Sure, you would sell chocolate to the continent, and yes, you can market to Black Americans. But one thing about our culture in Black America is that our culture is very, kind of, I want to use a certain word, but I'm gonna say our culture is very influential. And if we are saying, forget Hershey's, we eating this particular chocolate right here. I say this is about our people. This is about what we created as Black people. Believe it or not, even if you push it that way, other groups of people gonna want to come eat the chocolate because they always curious of what we're doing. Period. I mean, let's call it what it is. No matter what we do, other people follow. And so the key is connecting, the people who want to do this, of course, because some people in Black America don't want to do with it, and that's fine. You don't have to. We're not asking you to. But the people who want to connect, like I said, do the chocolate, do whatever the opportunities are in, and then, like I said, make the connections and bring that. Even as I say, produce chocolate here in America, produce chocolate on the continent. Do it both places. You know what I'm saying? I think it could work. I definitely think it could work. So we just need to find out who we need to connect with, because let's say you got people that's doing it right there in the continent, maybe in the small scale. Maybe you could partner with them to make them make it even bigger. We all need to work together. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. There's also this conversation I see in the diaspora community. Not everybody needs to come in. And the reason why Africa is quite scary is because of the level of risk. And I understand it. There are different levels of risk on different dimensions, financial risk, systemic risk, all of that. But you don't need to come in boots on the ground, and start your own thing. There's a level before that. And that level is to create market access. Let me explain what I mean. There are people here, entrepreneurs, very hardworking people who have been struggling to grow their businesses. The product is great, marvelous. Many of them handcrafted, many of them purely organic. Make your pick. The biggest problem they have is they don't have access to a market that would appreciate the value of what they make and pay them a fair price. Now, you don't need to go into production because this guy has already taken care of that. What you then need to do is be the person who provides the access to the market. And if you're in the diaspora, it's likely you are in a desirable market, whether it's in Canada, the US, or any of the countries in Europe. So the guy does the production. He's taking the risk of production. He's a local or she's a local. They best know how to handle their local environment. Whatever they go through, they produce, you pay them a fair price, and then you present it to the market that's willing to pay a premium. So you do that over some time, and then you see that business is good. The next logical thing is to see how you can help the guy on the ground up his game so he can produce more, so you can sell. So from that point, you're not getting into a point where you're becoming a JV, joint venture partner, or some kind of investor in his business. But before this even happens, you've already had the time to build a relationship as an off-taker, because you off-take the products that he creates and then you sell to the market. The risk there is not as much as bringing in your money, trying to start on the ground, dealing with all the different risks that you might find very difficult to handle as somebody coming from the outside. But if you have somebody on the ground who's already figured it out, creating something solid that can sell well, you be the off-taker, create access to a market, test it. If it works, you run that progress down the chain, empower this guy to produce more so that you can sell more. That is one formula I see that works really well and prevents you from taking on a lot of risk that you may not be prepared for. Then maybe after some time, you can then go full blast, get your boots on the ground, maybe if you want to relocate or something. But I always recommend a staged approach. Coming in, guns blazing, trying to take over the African market usually ends in sorrow sometimes. So you need to phase your approach.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said, because you're right. You can't just jump into anything like that, and you don't even know the market like that. But what you're saying is very good. Is basically you having that American passport, you ought to connect to the market, to the American market. So
exactly.
You could take that product that probably would have never came, let's say even starting the Black communities here in America, and now you the person can bring that in and say, hey, look, I got this product, I got this connect. you know, we making this over here in Nigeria. I mean, you know, because a lot of times they don't expose you to different chocolates like that. They want to make sure the mass market. They spend a lot of money on mass marketing, and certain chocolates in which, you know, when I do buy a chocolate, I do buy the fair, trade
fair
chocolate.
trade, yeah.
I don't buy that one. I don't buy nothing else, because if you look at the ingredients in fair trade versus the ingredients in an actual Hershey's bar, they put so much crap in a bad thing in that chocolate that I know they didn't come from the continent like that. So everything the white man touch, he ruins. Trust me, that's just what he do. But yeah, you definitely said a lot of, interesting things, for sure, about not only chocolate but opportunities. But John, for people that maybe have some questions or whatever, tell people how to get in contact with you if you have any kind of way to contact you.
Okay, so I'm on smallstarter.com. That's smallandstarter.com. I'm most active on LinkedIn. So you search me up at John Paul Iwuoha. My surname is Iwuoha, Iwuoha. I'm on Twitter at JP_Iwuoha. But I think the journey starts at smallstarter.com. You get on smallstarter.com, you have access to other opportunities I've analyzed and explored. You see the kinds of people I've worked with and what they're achieving. There's access to free courses. There's a podcast. In fact, it's very immersive because you're going into almost more than a decade's load of content. So if you're that kind of person who's been trying to get some kind of insight into the African market or try to figure things out, you're going to be shocked and then amazed by the time you get to Small Starter and then immerse yourself in the content. So yes, people ask me sometimes, why is it Small Starter? Every big thing starts small. All the big corporations you have today, Facebook, ExxonMobil, all of them, General Electric, all of them were once small companies. So it would be foolhardy for anybody to think they want to start big. When you take hits, when you're big, when you make mistakes, it's difficult to recover from big mistakes. But then when you're starting small and then you're making mistakes, you can recover from, and then you can grow. And on top of that, it's a natural progression of things. Everything in life, in nature, in business, starts small and then it grows. So that's the philosophy I live by, so that at the end of the process, we have more people who survive the journey, and we have less people who go in with a bang, they take hits, and then they fall and they are not able to recover. So it's smallstarter.com. That's where I think that's the very first place to get started with me at.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I know many of you like to go to smallstarter.com. John have definitely a course, for sure, and many other things that you guys can get involved with over there on smallstarter.com. So make sure you go and holler at the brother if you are interested. Well, John, we definitely thank you for joining us on the show today. It was definitely quite informative, and I like conversations like this, especially about the continent with business, because you're right. You see everybody running over there to go get involved in business, but we're afraid. Some of us are afraid, and it really is a lot of it's fear, because the white man done a great job at teaching us self-hate, teaching us to be hate each other, teaching us to be afraid of each other. But everybody else is taking these opportunities. So we're glad you brought the conversation today.
Thank you very much. I'm glad. Thank you for having me.